Hey, what's up guys? In this video I'm going to be talking about compressor release curves. These are super important. Attack in terms of compression gets a lot of love. You know, we focus on the transient and all that fun stuff, but we don't really look at the release and the importance of what the release is doing. So I'm going to be going over that. We're going to be looking at a snare today. And I'm using a snare because when you want to kind of demonstrate and explain what compression is doing, a snare is a good example. A snare, takes to compression well. We can compress it to all hell, depending on how much we drink. And a snare, is a great example for what we're about to do. A bus would also be a great example, but we're just going to focus on the snare for today. So let's drop in a compressor. And yes, again, depending on how much you drink that day, will really depend on how much you process the snare. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take off the makeup gain, turn that off, and you'll notice that we're getting a little bit of gain reduction right off the bat. And the reason for that, very important, this affects the release curve. It's the knee. So what I'll do is I'll just kind of bring this down. I'll give you an example. Right, so this yellow line up here is the gain reduction. We're getting some gain reduction, but the sound isn't actually going past the threshold. It's kind of weird. Why is that? It's because of the knee. So a knee was introduced. Well, a knee lets you control a particular behavior of analog compressors. Analog compressors will begin compressing before it goes past the threshold. So there's this sweet spot, and right now it's set to 6 dB per low. Once it gets 6 dB below the threshold, it will start compressing slightly. And the knee is this little thing above this yellow button here. I'm going to show you a plugin that makes this a little bit more visible, but it's a gentle roll-off. And this makes the compression sound a bit more natural, but it goes against what I'm trying to demonstrate right now. But yeah, the knee will affect the release curve and how the attack is achieved. It gives it a bit more natural compression. You can have, a lot of different kind of knee settings, but we're going to set it to 0, which is a full-on kind of bent knee that doesn't have a curve. Before I continue, I'm gonna give you an example of what that actually looks like. I'm gonna drop in Pro C2, which is a plugin we're gonna be looking at. So this is the knee. The knee is very curved, right? And this is the threshold. So as it approaches that threshold, the gain reduction will occur even before. So we set the knee to hard. It's a very linear, hard knee. This is a lot more digital. If I set the ratio to infinity to 1, which is limiting, it just it doesn't do anything, and as soon as it goes above that threshold, it'll start to compress. A soft knee is a little bit more analog, a little bit more gentle. It rides the audio. We're going to get into that perhaps. So let's go back into this compressor here. So we've set the knee to 0. Right, and yeah, I can set it to here, and nothing's happening. If I set the knee to 18, right, we get more gain reduction because, it's kind of approaching the threshold and whatnot, but yeah, so this gives it a little bit more of a gentleness. So I'll go back to 0 dB, and I'm going to bring down the threshold. Cool. So you'll notice that, it's pretty well compressed. I'm going to set it to maybe like 2.8 to 1, just some number. Right, so we're compressing that snare, and with the attack, you can adjust the snappiness. Right, so that is a very compressed snare. As we give it a bit more of a value on the attack, you will hear that that first little bit of that snare is poking through. Very well understood. We should all understand that by now. Right, so that compression is, grabbing that, but it's allowing that first little bit to go through, and this is giving us some dynamic range. So let's move on to the release. I'll give it a more exaggerated example. You'll notice that the release has a curve to it. Very cool. And that curve is a nonlinearity associated with analog equipment. It sounds more musical, and it's a mathematical function, and it prevents the release from being, it makes the release not linear. And there's drawbacks and there's pluses with linear versus logarithmic. The release envelope and the attack envelope is right here. Right now it's set to logarithmic, which is essentially a curve. Right. The curve is, I guess, more musical. It prevents pumping, which you might want, you might not want. If we go to linear, right, it's more of a linear kind of, it snaps back pretty fast. And this is useful for, I guess, more kind of complex material or a busy material if you really want to grab things and stuff like that. But the release curve is also affected by the knee. You remember what the knee does, right? We'll adjust the knee, right, and we're getting more of a curve to that point where, like, it's not so much snapping to values in a linear way, and that will prevent distortion depending on your release. If you have a really fast release, you can get some distortion, or even like a slower release, you get a little too much pumping. Right, so that's very overcompressed. It's really grabbing the audio. You want the release to recover before the next sound kind of hits. Right, so that is a kind of a pumping release, and we can set that to logarithmic, and it has a more gentler curve. And it's a matter of taste, and it's all about kind of being aware of it. And it doesn't so much add headroom. It just makes it more of a natural release curve that our ears like decide and discern as being more transparent. Transparency basically means that the compression that you are using is, it's not so much compression. And, like, the transparency on compressing vocals is very important. Vocals are very sensitive to that issue. All right, so let's move on to Pro C, which is more of a visual style here. And I'm going to set the knee to its default value, the ratio to 4:1, and it's clean. All right. And, we have the threshold at 0, but we're getting, that red line is the gain reduction. We're getting some gain reduction, 0.03 dB of gain reduction already, and that is because of the knee. If we make the knee more soft and curved, right, we'll get more compression. The compression will start at, it's around here. So at -3 dB, the compression will kind of occur. Turn off auto gain. Right, so we're getting kind of a gentler compression. Knees are very important, and knees will affect the release curve. And don't get too freaked out. So you'll get it because I kind of got it, and I'm not that intelligent. You're probably way smarter than me. Anyway, so we have we'll set the knee to 0 dB. So right now we got almost no. Yeah, we got 0 dB of gain reduction. And as we bring the threshold down, right, let's give it zoom in a bit here. All right, so now we can see that gain reduction is occurring. Set the release to fast. We can see that that curve there is, it's curvy. for lack of a better term. Right, very curvy, and that is because of the algorithm. So Pro C works in terms of algorithm or style. Okay, so style will, under the hood, adjust curves, attack and release, and it will affect your sound. And different styles or curves or algorithms, they are, I'm guessing, inspired by classic classic compressors, and they model them in a new way, and things like that. So let's go to classic, right? Just compare that, right? So it's more of a classic is more of a super gentle curve. As it gets to, as it gets to the end of its release, it takes longer and longer for that release to occur, right? Right around there, as opposed to clean, right, where it just snaps there, right? You understand? You see that snappiness? And then classic, right, it doesn't have enough time to fully recover before the next hit occurs. So that's another thing to look out for. Classic might not be appropriate for drums. Well, depending on the aggressiveness that you want to achieve, the classic might be appropriate for maybe like a lead or a synth bass or acoustic bass or whatever, vocal, who knows. Yeah, so keep that in mind. And, if we go to clean, right, as we adjust the knee, the release of that attack will change, and the attack too. The release curve will change, and the attack will as well. Right. So you'll notice that it's more of like a question mark curve now, which is pretty cool, and that is neat to me. I don't know the benefits, but these I guess asymmetrical attack and releases model that old school kind of gear. Opto is a gentle, and you'll notice that the curve is, I guess, a different. It's a different curve, for lack of a better term, and the utility of opto compressors is really good at being transparent. Right, and we can adjust the knee as well. Right, different curve. Right, it's more of a, as it gets closer to the end of its release cycle, it goes faster, and this makes opto compressors a lot more transparent. And even with extreme values of compression and things like that, it still sounds pretty decent. Right, and it's the people that made this synth here. It doesn't. It's very hard to distort and make it sound bad, even with no oversampling. It's a phenomenal compressor, in my opinion, and that's opto. Opto, yeah, very useful for what I've kind of explained. Vocal is really interesting. Vocal is a special algorithm. It gets rid of the ratio. You're like, what the heck's going on here? Right, and it's tailored for vocals. Remember, I was saying that transparency is very important in vocal compression. Well, this is why. And it's a very interesting release curve with the vocal style, right? It's a mix of linear and logarithmic. I guess it's more of a snappier curve. I don't know. Even the attack. Let's give that a listen. Right, and that'll really gently ride the audio, and it's tailor-made for vocals. And the knee gets grayed out as well, because I think the knee might be dynamic, or it's set, or it's a very complex knee function. I don't actually think, oh, this might be the knee. I'm not sure. It is. I don't think it matches, but it might. Who knows? I don't. Yeah, it's a lot of clever things going on under the hood. All right, so mastering is a gentle curve, right? And mastering is something that will kind of give cohesion to what you're doing. Not really appropriate for this piece of material, but yeah, super fast, and then it's kind of gentle, and it's dependent. Speaking of dependent, the auto release is something that is a mystery to me, but it's the release is dynamic depending on the amount of gain reduction on the attack. As far as I know, if I hover over it, what'll it tell me? The release time is determined automatically depending on the current amount of gain reduction. Using a release knob, you can adjust the scale over the effect. So yeah, the overall scale turns to 100% to 0%. So we'll go 100% auto release. Right, and auto release will, give us more of a, I don't want to use the word natural sound, but it's program dependent. So if you have a very complex, um, you know, uh, loop or bus or whatever, the auto release might be appropriate for what you're trying to do. Speaking of that, bus is a great algorithm that kind of, again, gives cohesion, but it's more for groups of instruments. So drums, your multiple layers of supersaws, etc. Right? Right. Curve is still kind of, appropriate. If we go to a knee, you'll notice that the curve is like so. Bus compression is super useful and highly recommended. I've done a lot of videos on bus processing for techno. I recommend you check them out. Punch, I'm imagining punch is a bit more of a super fast release, right? Not linear. Yeah, I guess it depends. The wrong material, but you know, we're working that. Pumping. Yeah, pumping is a lot more linear. Like it's kind of linear, but there's a curve to it, and it's right up there. This is linear, but it avoids distortion with super linear things. In computer audio, you don't want linear stuff because like those sharp changes doesn't sound good. You take it like the idea of making a square oscillator is very challenging because a square, you notice that it goes straight up. Doing that is not recommended. Things have to have curves and stuff like that. Yeah, but that's pumping, and we can adjust the pump amount with the knee. And things like that. There's a lot of different kinds of releases going on. I'll give you an example here. Let's go. Well, limiters, as far as I know, have a very complex release under the hood. The auto release is highly dependent on what's being fed into it, and that's how you get that compression without, or not that maximizer kind of. That's a buzzword. It's essentially a limiter, but it's a way to achieve that extra loudness without getting that distortion. But you get a good quality compressor. The release, even if it's really fast, won't cause distortion because there's a lot of smart people building stuff that impresses me. Yeah, one of the classics, CLA, CLA2A. There it is. So this is an LA2A, and you'll notice, right, that VU meter reduction, it's non-linear. It has a curve, like super fast on the recovery from like 6 to 1, and then it slowly edges back. And that's a great sound. LA2As are everywhere, and they sound pretty cool. And, you know, that is that for that sort of thing. You know, something like this sort of thing might have a different release profile. It's not settable because they're emulating a particular instrument or a particular compressor, sorry. Right? So this release curve is a lot quicker. Right? This is showing the gain reduction, by the way. Make sure you have the correct gain reduction. Right? Yeah, and then it's a little bit slower once we get like that hardcore gain reduction. Right? So it's very dependent on what's going on. And yeah, there's the variable release here, which is, you know, pretty neat. Right? We can slam things. We can not so slam things. Really cool. And these compressors, there's a lot of clever things that they put in them, in terms of components and resistors and stuff that makes them sound the way that they sound. And just kind of demonstrated it, and that's why they are useful. And then we have something like this, which is one of the first kind of Swiss Army knives. If I go audio track, stereo. This was what the heck? Okay. Oh, 25th year edition. Okay. Oh, precision. Nope. Legacy. So yeah, this was, one of the first kind of really cool things that I ran into. And what it does is actually no, maybe yeah, this isn't greatest example because you can't actually see it. I'm gonna do a video on audio tracks soon, but this right here, this is a compressor that kind of timeless. It's one of those Swiss Army knives. It's like, you really need to know what you're doing with this compressor because they bring down the threshold and nothing will happen. Right? You actually have to set the ratio, and the ratio, you'll see, the EQ curve is wackiness, right? Like holy crap! And what that's doing is that's affecting the 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 gain reduction quite a bit, and it's giving your track a bit more aggression. Almost sounds like it's gating. And I think that's based on something, but yeah, you can have the knee kind of fold back in on itself, which is weird. And yeah, there's that knee, that non-linear knee that is inherent to the classic compressors, right? It levels off as it's approaching, right? It's kind of like, okay. And then when you get to, the threshold, then it's like, all right, for lack of a better description. But this has a release curve underneath the hood as well, things like that. So anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed that video. I hope you learned stuff. Take care and have a good one.